U.S. Army Signal Corps photographs show uniformed Wehrmachthelferinnen, female auxiliaries, standing behind newly strung barbed wire in a third U.S. Army prisoner of war enclosure on the day Germany signed the Instrument of Surrender. By May 1945, Western Allied forces were processing prisoners at a scale without precedent. More than 3.15 million Germans in Western hands by 30th April 1945, rising to 7.6 million after capitulation. U.S. European theater directives required application of the 1929 Geneva Convention, registration, medical inspection, and rations equivalent in quantity and quality to depot troops, while a strict non-fraternization order initially forbade friendly contact. The documented contrast is stark. Rumors of summary reprisals versus a codified system of intake, segregation, and care under military law. One Signal Corps caption identifies female members of the Wehrmacht in a 3rd U.S. Army POW enclosure, Regensburg, Germany, 8 May 1945. The open question is precise. What do records, orders, and numbers reveal about the capture and treatment of German women POWs in those final weeks? Germany, 1941 through 1945, Reich territory, field commands, and Luftwaffe stations across occupied Europe. A mobilization directive lands on a staff officer's desk in Berlin, expanding the intake of female auxiliaries into Wehrmacht service. The document is precise, bureaucratic, stamped with Reich Eagle seals. Personnel tables list new billets, signals operators, plotting assistants, medical orderlies, administrative clerks. Wartime posters showed women as patriotic supporters, far from danger. The administrative reality told a different story. Personnel regulations placed many under direct military discipline. They wore uniforms, they carried military identification, they served in signals units, air defense commands, and field hospitals under Wehrmacht authority. The categories were official: Wehrmachthelferinnen in the Heer, Luftnachrichtenhelferinnen in Luftwaffe signals, Flakwaffenhelferinnen at anti-aircraft batteries, medical personnel in field hospitals. The Reich Labor Service for Women, RAID WJ, fed the pipeline. The Wehrmacht Personnel Office managed assignments. Their technology was standard military issue. Field telephones, model Feldfernsprecher 3.3, connected forward positions to rear commands. Lorentz teleprinters clattered in signals centers. Switchboards routed calls across entire army groups. At Luftwaffe flak batteries, women operated plotting boards linked to commander-grade fire control computers for 8.8 centimeter flak 3.6 and 3.7 guns. Regulations usually prohibited women from firing weapons directly, but they tracked aircraft, calculated ranges, and transmitted firing data. Hospital companies relied on female orderlies for casualty clearing stations. Records clerks maintained personnel files and operational logs. Cipher assistants handled encrypted communications under strict security protocols. By 1945, approximately 500,000 women served as Wehrmacht auxiliaries. Conscription measures intensified from 1941 onward. In November 1944, consolidation unified scattered categories under tighter military control. Wehrmacht personnel directives classified auxiliaries as subject to military law. They wore standardized uniforms with branch insignia. If captured, regulations suggested they should receive prisoner of war status, not civilian internment. The legal architecture existed on paper for years. In spring 1945, it became operational reality on a massive scale. As German forces collapsed, entire auxiliary detachments surrendered with their parent units. The category few civilians discussed became a logistical challenge for U.S. forces receiving women in Wehrmacht uniform at wire gates across Bavaria and the Rhineland. The question was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, documented, and photographed. Western Front and Interior Germany, April through May 1945. Rhine crossings, Ruhr pocket closures, and Bavarian advances. A daily situation report arrives at 12th Army Group headquarters. Prisoner headcounts at temporary enclosures exceed planned capacity by factors of 2, 3, sometimes 5. Rail sidings fill with prisoner of war transports. Field commanders radio for additional guards, rations, and medical personnel. German expectations centered on phased capitulation, orderly withdrawals, negotiated surrenders, controlled handovers. Reality delivered immediate mass surrenders, producing prisoner totals in the millions within weeks. 12th Army Group coordinated operations. 3rd U.S. Army swept through Bavaria. 7th Army advanced into southern Germany. Theater provost marshal offices scrambled to establish prisoner of war, transit and enclosure commands, PWTE in military shorthand. Rhine meadow camps absorbed overflow. Bavarian facilities opened to distribute the load. The numbers mounted relentlessly. Western allies held 3.15 million German prisoners before 30th April 1945. After V-Day, totals exceeded 7 million by summer's end. Rhine Meadow camps, Rheinwiesenlager, held peak headcounts exceeding 1 million prisoners at maximum surge. Bavarian cages near Regensburg, Landshut and Moosburg processed tens of thousands daily. Standing operating procedures governed intake. Disarmament came first. Weapons collected, ammunition surrendered, grenades disposed, search teams checked for concealed items. Segregation followed established patterns. Officers separated from enlisted ranks, medical personnel identified, women directed to designated areas. Medical triage began immediately. Doctors screened for communicable diseases. Wounded prisoners moved to aid. Stations, registration forms, US-generated equivalents of German personal Karten, recorded name, rank, unit, and capture date. Assignment to compounds completed the pipeline. Fenced enclosures held prisoners by category, pending further processing or transfer. European theater orders mandated Geneva standard treatment. Rations would match depot troop levels. Medical inspections would occur regularly. Registration would enable Red Cross notification. Photographs from May 1945 document the system. Fenced compounds, guard towers, roll call formations, and intake lines stretching across muddy fields. Sudden volume forced improvisation. Open-air enclosures operated pending redistribution to permanent facilities. Tentage lagged behind prisoner arrivals. Kitchen capacity strained under unprecedented demand. Temporary shortfalls in shelter and mess equipment shaped conditions during peak weeks. On 8 May 1945, Regensburg's prisoner cage included uniformed women. The photograph exists. The caption identifies them. The enclosure absorbed a category planners had addressed in doctrine but rarely tested at operational scale. The system adapted in real time. Women entered the same pipeline as male prisoners, subject to the same orders, the same convention, the same administrative machine processing millions. Regensburg, Bavaria, 8 May 1945, 3rd U.S. Army prisoner of war enclosure. A Signal Corps photographer adjusts his speed graphic camera, composes the frame, and exposes the negative. The subject, women in Wehrmacht uniform standing behind barbed wire. A caption card follows. Female members of the Wehrmacht in a 3rd U.S. Army POW enclosure, Regensburg, Germany, 8 May 1945. Civilian rumors circulated widely during the war's final weeks. Stories of reprisals, of summary executions, of chaos at surrender points. The photograph records a different reality. Ordered intake, administrative procedure, visible infrastructure. 3rd U.S. Army operated under 12th Army Group Command. General George S. Patton's forces had driven deep into Bavaria during April. Local PWTE staff reported through provost marshal channels to theater headquarters. German women wore identifying branch badges and rank tabs. Luftwaffe blue-gray, signals yellow, medical dark blue. The image shows what is documentable. Women in uniform, segregated enclosure area, standard camp infrastructure, wire fencing, wooden posts, guard positions. A field desk visible in the background suggests registration processing. Medical examination tents stand nearby. No speculation is warranted about individual thoughts or conversations. The photograph records physical facts, presence, custody, procedure. Technology links the moment to policy. Delousing units operated at every major camp. DDT dusting protocols would expand later in 1945, but soap and water methods and steam disinfection functioned immediately. Field records tracked prisoner numbers by compound. Identity slips moved through administrative channels. Medical exam tents processed intake health screenings. Guard rosters assigned sentries to designated sectors. The caption and negative index constitute primary archival evidence. They anchor chronology precisely. They confirm that female prisoners of war entered U.S. custody on Germany's surrender day. They permit measured inferences about how European theater directives applied to women in Wehrmacht uniform. The same week, theater orders maintained strict non-fraternization policy, no conversation with German nationals, no exchange of gifts or favors. The regulation codified distance, even as due process operated visibly at wire gates. The policy protected forced discipline. It prevented unauthorized contacts that might compromise security or create incidents. It also limited the humane reassurance that direct speech might provide. Within weeks, revisions would begin, but on 8 May, the rules remained absolute. The photograph survives. The women behind the wire entered a system governed by written orders, established procedures, and international law. What happened next depended not on battlefield rumor but on documented policy. Rations calculated, medical care scheduled, transfers planned. The camera recorded the moment, the archives preserved it. The question shifts from what was feared to what the record shows was done. European Theatre of Operations, United States Army, Itusa, 1944 through May 1945. Theatre headquarters, Judge Advocate General sections and Provost Marshal offices across the command. A JAG circular lands on a staff officer's desk. The pages list prisoner of war entitlements line by line, article by article derived from the Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, signed at Geneva on 27 July 1929. German anxieties centered on reprisal. Years of propaganda warned of Allied brutality. Reality delivered codified obligations that superseded battlefield emotion. The War Department, Itusa Command, the Provost Marshal General's Office, and International Committee of the Red Cross Liaison Officers all operated within the Convention framework. The treaty bound signatory powers to specific standards. Article 11 required rations equivalent in quantity and quality to those issued to depot troops of the detaining power. Shortages affecting the captor's own forces could justify temporary reductions, but the standard remained depot equivalents, not punishment rations. Medical provisions mandated regular inspections. Article 14 specified that prisoners must receive care equivalent to that provided to the captor's forces. Infectious disease control, surgical treatment, and hospitalization followed the same protocols applied to U.S. personnel. Segregation requirements appeared throughout the text. Officers separated from enlisted ranks, different. Nationalities separated when operationally feasible. Article 3 addressed women specifically. Women shall be treated with all consideration due to their sex. Protection from public curiosity received explicit mention. Prisoners could not be displayed for propaganda or humiliation. Correspondence rights activated after registration. Prisoners could write and receive mail, subject to censorship for security. European theatre directives reproduced convention language verbatim. Theatre general orders and provost marshal circulars repeated the ration formula. Prisoners would receive food equivalent to depot troops, subject to supply constraints affecting U.S. units equally. The legal framework constrained unit discretion at every level. Battalion commanders could not improvise punishment. Camp commandants could not withhold medical care. Supply officers could not divert rations arbitrarily. The convention created predictable, auditable standards that applied regardless of local commanders' attitudes. This structure proved critical for categories with little precedent in U.S. custody. Women prisoners existed in small numbers throughout the war. Nurses captured in the Philippines, resistance fighters in Europe, the 1945 surge in female auxiliaries tested the system's capacity to apply written rules at operational scale. Even where shelter lagged during May's peak intake, calorie tables governed policy. Daily ration targets, 2,800 to 3,000 calories depending on work status, appeared in quartermaster orders. Mess sergeants worked to those numbers, not to rumor or prejudice. The convention did not guarantee comfort. It mandated baseline standards: food, water, shelter, medical care, registration, and eventual repatriation. The standards were measurable. Camp inspectors could audit compliance. Red Cross visitors could verify conditions. For women behind wire at Regensburg and elsewhere, the convention meant that outcomes would follow documented procedure, not battlefield chaos. The text mattered more than sentiment. The numbers would tell the story. Western Allied prisoner of war, transit and enclosure commands, April through June 1945, Rhine camps, Hessian facilities, Bavarian enclosures. A processing officer stamps a registration card while medical personnel queue prisoners for inspection and delousing. Expectation centered on immediate punishment. Battlefield rumor suggested chaos, revenge, arbitrary treatment. Reality delivered bureaucratic sequencing. Search, inventory, medical screening, registration, compound assignment. POW processing companies operated standardized tables of organization. Personnel rosters included searchers, clerks, medics, guards, and interpreters. Female compounds or fenced sections within larger camps required dedicated guard detachments. Camp medical detachments assigned personnel to intake screening. The processing flow followed written doctrine. Disarmament completed at forward collection points. Search teams at permanent camps checked clothing and personal effects for contraband, intelligence materials, and weapons. An inventory recorded confiscated items, watches, jewelry, military documents, with receipt slips issued when feasible. Medical control began with visual screening. Medics identified obvious wounds, infectious disease symptoms, and malnutrition. Delousing came next. Field disinfectors used soap, hot water, and steam. DDT dusting protocols would expand widely later in 1945, but initial methods relied on proven sanitation techniques. Water points supplied washing and drinking water. Engineers installed temporary latrines and drainage systems. Tentage arrived as supply allowed. Inoculation programs targeted typhus, typhoid, and tetanus. Daily intake rates reached tens of thousands across all sectors combined. Registration cards, hundreds of thousands issued within weeks, recorded essential data: name, rank, serial number, unit, capture date, and location. The cards enabled Red Cross notification, mail delivery, and eventual repatriation processing. Documented shortages affected shelter and mess capacity during May peaks. Tentage allocations lagged behind prisoner arrivals. Kitchen equipment stretched to maximum output. By June, supply lines stabilized, stocks caught up. Conditions measurably improved. Theater medical summaries noted communicable disease incidents. Lice infestations appeared frequently among prisoners arriving from collapsed frontline units. Typhus risk existed, but remained manageable. Delousing campaigns reduced transmission. Actual typhus cases stayed well below feared levels. Early discomfort stemmed from throughput constraints and supply bottlenecks, not punitive intent. The system learned in real time. Engineers refined drainage. Quartermasters accelerated tentage shipments. Medical teams streamlined screening protocols. Non-fraternization policy remained in force. Guards could not chat casually with prisoners. Processing officers delivered instructions without informal reassurance. Medical staff provided care but limited conversation to clinical necessities. The policy served force protection and discipline. It prevented incidents that might escalate tensions. It maintained clear boundaries between captor and captive. It also meant that humane treatment occurred without humane speech. Prisoners received food, water, medical attention, and shelter, but little verbal comfort. The gap between procedure and perception remained wide. For women entering the system, the experience combined visible care with rigid distance. They were searched by female personnel when available, housed separately, and processed through identical administrative steps. The registration card proved they existed in the system. The medical log proved they received care. The ration return proved they were fed. Speech would come later. In May 1945, the system spoke through actions alone. Rheinwiesenlager and Bavarian enclosures. May through July 1945, quartermaster offices, field bakeries, and supply depots across the U.S. zone. A ledger page shows ration tonnages by enclosure, convoy arrival dates, and distribution schedules. An engineer memo lists tentage received, erected, and allocated. German accounts after the war claimed systematic starvation. Documentary evidence shows authorized ration scales and measurable improvement as supply capacity matched prisoner intake. Peak headcounts exceeded 1 million prisoners in the Rhine camp system alone. The surge tested logistics at every node. Ration equivalence policy remained in force. Prisoners would receive food equivalent to U.S. depot troops, approximately 2,800 to 3,000 calories daily, depending on work status. Authorized substitutions addressed local shortages. When bread supplies lagged, potatoes replaced wheat. When meat shipments fell short, vegetable protein sources substituted. The substitutions maintained calorie targets even when specific items varied. Field bakeries operated continuously. Captured Wehrmacht bakeries were reactivated under U.S. supervision. Rail and truck lift allocated to prisoner movements competed with other theater priorities: forward supply for occupation forces, displaced person support, civilian relief. Water purification units deployed to major camps. Engineers constructed distribution points and storage tanks. Sanitation lagged initially but improved as engineer battalions completed drainage and latrine construction. Ration tonnages in quartermaster records show the recovery curve. Early May deliveries fell short of theoretical requirements. Mid-May allocations increased. By late May and through June, supplies consistently met authorized scales. Health metrics tracked the improvement. Theater medical reports noted that nutrition-related illness declined as ration delivery stabilized. Mortality rates, already low in Western custody relative to other theaters, decreased further as shelter, sanitation, and food supply improved. The bottleneck shifted from food availability to transport and work allocation. Once prisoners were adequately fed and sheltered, the system focused on repatriation schedules and labor utilization under convention rules. Article 27 of the Geneva Convention permitted prisoner labor on non-military tasks. Agriculture, road repair, rubble clearance, and reconstruction work fell within authorized categories. Officers could not be compelled to work. Enlisted prisoners and auxiliaries could be assigned tasks consistent with their health and skills. Work details improved morale and added structure to camp routines. Prisoners building roads or clearing rubble ate, slept, and recovered while contributing to reconstruction. The ration ledger tells a story of initial overload and subsequent correction. The first weeks challenged every assumption. About POW logistics. Millions arrived faster than peacetime doctrine anticipated. Temporary open-air compounds substituted for permanent barracks. Rations sometimes fell below targets during peak surge, but the system adapted. Supply caught up. Tentage arrived. Kitchens expanded. Water points multiplied. Medical care scaled. For women prisoners at Regensburg and elsewhere, the experience mirrored that of male POWs. Initial discomfort during the May chaos, followed by stabilization as logistics normalized. Non-fraternization policy still forbade casual contact. Reassurance remained procedural, not verbal, but the procedure worked. Food arrived, shelter improved, medical care continued. The next policy change would address not logistics, but human contact. The ration ledger closed each month with totals, variances, and explanations. The story it tells is neither vengeance nor comfort, just the grinding mechanics of feeding millions while rebuilding supply chains from combat to occupation. The numbers show the system learning. U.S. Zone of Germany, May through September 1945. Camp bulletin boards, guard posts, and military government offices. A printed order appears on walls across occupied territory. No conversation, gifts, or favors will be exchanged with German nationals. U.S. policy aimed to prevent disorder, protect discipline, and avoid incidents that might compromise occupation security. German expectations varied. Some anticipated kindness, others feared revenge. The non-fraternization regime applied broadly. Contact with German civilians faced strict prohibition. Prisoner of war camps operated under the same rules. Guards could not chat casually with prisoners. Processing personnel delivered instructions without informal conversation. Medical staff limited speech to clinical necessity. The policy timeline reveals progressive relaxation. May 1945, strict prohibition in full force across all categories. June 1945, exceptions authorized for children under military age. July 1945, limited adult contact permitted for official purposes. Supervision, work direction, administrative requirements. September 1945, policy largely rescinded, replaced by conduct guidance emphasizing professionalism. Theater bulletins documented each revision. Orders specified which interactions remained forbidden and which became permissible. Military government circulars clarified application to different contexts: civilian populations, prisoner camps, displaced persons facilities. The rationale centered on force protection and discipline. Fraternization might create security vulnerabilities. Personal relationships might compromise objectivity. Unauthorized exchanges might provoke incidents or accusations of favoritism. German prisoners experienced the policy as rigid silence. U.S. guards stood watch without conversation. Orders arrived without explanation beyond immediate compliance. Requirements. Questions received minimal responses. For women prisoners, the silence compounded uncertainty. Processing moved them through administrative steps: search, medical exam, registration, assignment. Without verbal reassurance, guards maintained professional distance. Medical personnel examined without chatting. The policy preserved order. It prevented exploitation. It maintained clear command authority. It also impeded the informal human contact that might have eased fear. Reassurance came through actions. Food delivered, medical care provided, shelter improved, but not through words. As summer advanced, relaxations changed the dynamic. Guards could speak when supervising work details. Medical staff could explain treatments. Processing officers could answer basic questions about procedures and timelines. The shift from absolute prohibition to limited permissible contact did not alter core POW handling. Rations continued at authorized scales. Medical care proceeded on schedule. Transfer planning advanced. What changed was perception. When speech became possible, routine explanations replaced speculation. Prisoners learned their status, their rights under the convention, and the planned repatriation timeline. The policy's evolution demonstrates institutional learning. Absolute prohibition served initial occupation goals: preventing incidents, maintaining discipline, establishing control. Once occupation stabilized, tactical relaxations enabled functional interaction without compromising security. For women prisoners photographed at Regensburg on 8 May, the non-fraternization order meant they entered custody in official silence. Guards watched without speaking. Medics examined without reassuring. Food arrived without explanation. Within weeks, the rules eased. By summer's end, routine contact occurred within professional boundaries. The policy's arc, from prohibition through controlled relaxation to normalized interaction, parallels the broader occupation learning curve. Early rigidity gave way to pragmatic flexibility as commanders gained confidence and systems stabilized. Non-fraternization did not determine outcomes, the convention did. but the speech policy shaped how prisoners experienced those outcomes, whether with reassurance or uncertainty, explanation or silence. By autumn 1945, the barrier had largely dissolved. Procedure replaced prohibition. Routine contact became normal. The silence had served its purpose. Now speech could serve reconstruction. Western Allied custody zones, 1945 through 1947, Allied Control Authority offices, International Committee of the Red Cross reporting, and National POW administrative centers. A statistical annex compares death rates by custody system, month, and cause. Polemical claims after the war alleged mass deaths in Western custody. Compiled data show Western Allied prisoner mortality in low single-digit percentages across millions. Held far below Axis treatment of Soviet POWs and below conditions in immediate post-combat collapse zones. The comparative frame provides context. German forces killed approximately 3.3 million Soviet POWs through starvation, exposure, and deliberate neglect. Nearly 60% of all Soviet prisoners captured. Allied POWs in German custody experienced mortality around 4%. Brutal but exponentially lower than Soviet rates. Japanese custody killed over 1/4 of Western Allied prisoners through forced labor, starvation, and systematic abuse. Western Allied custody of German prisoners produced mortality estimates in the 1 to 2% range across the entire population held from 1944 through 1947. Early May 1945 conditions, open-air camps, supply shortages, disease risk, caused elevated deaths during peak intake weeks. As rations stabilized, shelter improved, and medical care scaled, mortality declined markedly. International Committee of the Red Cross summaries documented causes of death, disease, exposure during initial capture, wounds sustained before surrender, and pre-existing conditions. Typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia killed more prisoners than malnutrition once rations reached authorized scales. Allied audits listed month-by-month reductions in death rates. May 1945 showed peak mortality during maximum surge. June recorded substantial improvement. July and subsequent months showed further declines as system capacity matched population. Scholarly rebuttals to exaggerated casualty claims emphasize several factors. First, German records at war's end were incomplete. Many units destroyed personnel files during retreat. Second, some German soldiers listed as POW deaths actually died in combat before formal surrender. Third, post-war polemics conflated all German military deaths in spring 1945 with POW camp mortality, inflating totals artificially. Documented Western Allied mortality, tens of thousands against millions held, reveals a system under severe stress that nonetheless avoided catastrophic breakdown. Early shortages were real, conditions during May were harsh, but the system corrected, supplies arrived, and outcomes improved. The comparison to other custody systems underscores the difference. German treatment of Soviet POWs, systematic extermination through starvation and exposure, with mortality exceeding 50%. Western Allied treatment of German POWs, initial logistics failure during unprecedented surge, followed by correction and stabilization, with mortality in low single digits. The convention framework mattered. Western allies audited their own performance, investigated complaints, and adjusted procedures when shortfalls appeared. Mortality statistics were compiled, causes analyzed, and corrective measures implemented. For women prisoners, aggregate data rarely disaggregate by sex. They appear in overall totals without separate breakouts in most ledgers. The low overall mortality rate suggests female prisoners experienced similar outcomes. Initial hardship during May chaos followed by stabilization. Archival evidence supports system learning. Where rations improved and transfers reduced transit fatigue, mortality declined further. Medical reports show responsive adjustments. More doctors assigned, disease control intensified, hospitalization capacity expanded. The statistical story is neither heroic nor damning. It shows an imperfect system handling unprecedented volume under combat to occupation transition. The system experienced bottlenecks, made errors, and caused suffering through insufficient initial preparation, but it also corrected, learned, and improved. Mortality remained orders of magnitude lower than Axis custody systems. The Geneva Framework provided measurable standards that prevented arbitrary cruelty. With macrometrics clarified, the lens narrows to verifiable women's enclosures and dated photographs. The numbers explain the system. The images document the individuals. Together, they tell what actually happened behind the wire. Regensburg, 8th May 1945, Upper Bavaria, mid-May 1945, U.S. Army Photographic Archive, An index card lists unit, place, and caption. Negatives filed with date stamps. Cross-references note related images from the same day and location. Nazi propaganda warned of Allied brutality throughout the war. Official images document routine segregation and administrative supervision. The evidence set begins at Regensburg. 3rd U.S. Army Signal Corps photographer recorded uniformed women behind barbed wire. The enclosure infrastructure appears in frame, wire fencing, wooden posts, guard positions, registration table visible in background. The caption identifies them explicitly. Female members of the Wehrmacht in a 3rd U.S. Army POW enclosure, Regensburg, Germany, 8th May, 1945. 7th U.S. Army photographic units captured surrender scenes in southern Bavaria around the same period. Bad Aibling images from 14th May show women auxiliaries in surrender columns. Uniforms identify branch, Luftwaffe, blue-gray, signals yellow piping, medical dark blue facings. The photographs record physical facts. Women wear Wehrmacht uniforms with visible rank insignia and branch badges. They stand in fenced compounds with U.S. guards posted. Camp infrastructure, tents, field desks, medical stations appears in background and middle distance. No speculation about individual thoughts or statements is possible from still images. What the photographs prove is custody status. These women were processed as prisoners of war under U.S. military control, not executed, not released to chaos, not abandoned to vigilante action. The archival captions carry evidentiary weight. Signal Corps photographers recorded subject, date, and location as standard procedure. The caption cards underwent official review before filing. The negative preservation system maintained chronological integrity. Fixed images confirmed that women were processed as POWs under U.S. custody. Policy, not rumor, determined outcomes. The convention framework applied, registration occurred, medical screening proceeded, segregation by sex followed doctrine. The photographic evidence addresses a specific counterfactual. Rumors during spring 1945 suggested chaos at surrender points, possible reprisals, breakdown of military discipline. The images show organized intake, visible administrative procedure, and standard POW infrastructure. For historians, these photographs function as primary sources. They document presence, date, location, and basic circumstances. They support inferences about broader policy implementation. They cannot tell the full story, no image of a single moment can, but they anchor analysis in verified fact. The women in the Regensburg photograph entered the same system, processing millions. They experienced the same initial shortages during May's surge. They benefited from the same supply improvements in June and July. They waited in the same repatriation queues as male prisoners. The non-fraternization order still governed contact when the photograph was taken. Guards maintained silence. Processing offered no verbal reassurance. But the visible order, registration desk, medical tent, organized compounds, demonstrated procedure over chaos. The photographic archive preserves these moments. Index cards cross-reference related images. Negative files maintain chronology. Caption text provides contemporary identification. One image cannot explain all policy or experience. But the Regensburg photograph on 8th May 1945 documents a moment when fear met procedure, when rumor encountered reality, when women in Wehrmacht uniforms stood behind U.S. wire under Geneva Convention protection. The next documentary trace shifts from image to administration, the orders and circulars that transformed contact rules and normalized routine. U.S. zone of Germany, June through August 1945. Military government detachments, camp commandant offices, and theater headquarters. A civil affairs circular revises guidance on contact with German nationals. A medical officer signs off on weekly inoculation tallies. Initial silence and rigid distance gave way to authorized minimal conversation for supervision, welfare checks, and employment placement. Military government detachments administered occupation zones. Camp commandants managed POW facilities under provost marshal oversight. Medical detachments provided continuing care and tracked health metrics. Labor allocation offices assigned work details under Article 31 of the Geneva Convention. Prisoner labor could support non-military tasks only. Agriculture topped the list. Farms across Germany needed workers for planting and harvest, clearing rubble from bombed. Cities required massive labor. Road and bridge repair aided reconstruction. All work assignments required medical clearance and respected rank limitations. POW work statistics compiled through summer 1945 show tens of thousands assigned to agriculture, thousands more to construction and repair, and large numbers to camp maintenance tasks. Cooking, sanitation, facility upkeep, medical throughput received weekly documentation. Inoculation tallies tracked typhus, typhoid, and tetanus vaccines administered. Hospitalization logs recorded admissions, treatments, and discharges. Disease incidence reports showed declining communicable illness as sanitation improved and vaccination coverage expanded. Mail and notification services activated after registration processing. Prisoners could send correspondence home, subject to censorship for security. Red Cross notification informed families of capture status. The mail pipeline operated slowly. Backlogs persisted through summer, but the system functioned. Civil affairs memos authorized limited contact once policy relaxations took effect. Guards could speak when supervising work details. Medical personnel could explain procedures and treatments. Processing officers could answer questions about status, rights, and timelines. The shift from silence to limited speech proved significant for prisoner perceptions. When guards could explain, uncertainty decreased. When medics could reassure, cooperation improved. When administrators could describe repatriation plans, prisoners understood their status within a comprehensible system. For women prisoners, normalized contact meant interactions became routine rather than exceptional. Work assignments followed the same criteria applied to male prisoners: health, skills, and convention compliance. Medical care proceeded with communication rather than silent examination. Administrative questions received answers rather than dismissal. The decisive moment was not dramatic. It was administrative, a circular revising contact policy, a memo clarifying supervision protocols, a form authorizing limited conversation. This bureaucratic inflection transformed daily experience more than any single material improvement. Food and shelter had stabilized by June. What changed in summer was voice, the ability to ask, to explain, to receive answers. Work details brought prisoners outside wire compounds into supervised interaction with German civilians and occupation forces. Agriculture assignments placed prisoners on farms alongside German farmers. Rubble clearing details worked in city streets. The labor provided structure, purpose, and gradual reintegration into normal activity patterns. Article 31 compliance required that work be non-military, adequately supervised, and consistent with prisoner health. Camp commandants assigned quotas, medical officers certified fitness, guard details supervised execution. The numbers compiled through summer show the system operating at scale. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners engaged in authorized labor. Productivity metrics appeared in weekly reports. Hours worked, tasks completed, and output measured demonstrated convention-compliant utilization. The administrative inflection from fear to procedure occurred not through sentiment but through orders. Civil affairs revised contact policy. Medical officers maintained care protocols. Labor allocation offices processed work assignments. For women photographed at Regensburg in May, the summer brought normalization. Speech replaced silence. Routine replaced uncertainty. Procedure proved more powerful than rumor. The critical variable became time. How long until transfer? When repatriation would begin? Where the system would move them next? Western custody systems, late 1945 through 1947. U.S. zone, British zone, French zone, coordination offices, repatriation processing centers. A transport roster allocates rail cars by destination and prisoner category. A return schedule lists monthly quotas and cumulative totals. Expectations centered on indefinite detention. Reality delivered staged repatriations governed by Allied policy, reconstruction labor needs, and available transport capacity. In the United States homeland, POW strength peaked at 371,683 in May 1945. Total German and Italian prisoners held in the continental U.S. reached approximately 425,000 over the entire war period. These prisoners worked on farms, in lumber camps, and at other labor-short industries under Geneva Convention restrictions. Repatriation from U.S. camps began in spring 1946 and concluded by mid-1947. In Europe, the scale dwarfed U.S. domestic holdings. Over 7 million German prisoners in Western custody required processing, classification, and eventual return. Progressive reductions through 1946 and 47 depended on transport capacity, security screening, and labor utilization decisions. The British and French zones retained prisoners longer for reconstruction work. British policy authorized extended labor utilization until 1948 for some categories. French forces held German prisoners for mine clearance, infrastructure repair, and agricultural work through 1949 in limited cases. U.S. policy emphasized earlier return. Most prisoners in U.S. custody repatriated by late 1946. Exceptions applied to prisoners under investigation for war crimes, those requiring extended medical treatment, and specialized workers retained for specific projects. Transport rosters governed the flow. Rail allocations specified cars per convoy, destinations by zone, and prisoner categories per transport. Medical screening preceded movement. No prisoner traveled while acutely ill. Security checks excluded suspects pending investigation. Camp closure. Orders tracked the drawdown. As prisoner populations declined, facilities decommissioned, guards reassigned, infrastructure transferred to military government for displaced persons or civilian use. Women prisoners disappeared into aggregate totals without separate statistical breakouts in many ledgers. Processing classified by rank, unit, and capture location, not systematically by sex. When women repatriated, they moved in mixed convoys or in small single-sex groups that generated minimal separate documentation. The data gap explains why photographs like Regensburg carry unusual evidentiary weight. Images prove presence where ledgers remain silent. The absence of detailed sex-specific statistics does not mean women were excluded from repatriation. It means they repatriated within systems that tracked other variables as primary sorting criteria. Allied Control Council directives set repatriation priorities. Medical cases first, wounded and ill prisoners moved early, then prisoners from specific geographic zones, enabling family reunification. Finally, remaining populations released as transport and screening permitted. War Department return schedules listed monthly targets. Theater provost marshal offices compiled progress reports. Red Cross observers monitored procedures and verified compliance with convention repatriation articles. By late 1947, the vast majority had returned home. Residual populations included medical holdovers, investigation subjects, and administrative backlogs. The repatriation timeline reveals the system's arc: capture in spring 1945, stabilization through summer, labor utilization into 1946, progressive releases from mid-46 through 47, final remnants cleared by 48. For women auxiliaries, the timeline matched male prisoners' experience: capture, processing, labor assignments within convention limits, and eventual return to occupation zones in Germany. The transport roster closed with final totals, convoy counts, and destination confirmations. The statistics explained why photographs mattered. They documented presence where numbers were aggregated into larger categories. The system processed millions, among them women in Wehrmacht uniform entered as POWs and departed as repatriates. The ledgers show the flow. The photographs show the faces. Together, they prove what happened when law governed logistics. Allied Records Offices and Archives, 1945 through 1947, National Repositories, post-war, a clerk's tally sheet shows prisoner categories. Officers, non-commissioned officers, enlisted ranks. Unit designations appear. Rank abbreviations fill columns. Sex receives no dedicated field in standard forms. Visual certainty exists. Dated photographs prove women prisoners at identified locations. Statistical opacity persists. Few sex-specific totals appear in aggregate returns. International Committee of the Red Cross. Notifications referenced segregation requirements. Convention Article 3 mandated separate quarters for women. Camp inspection reports verified compliance, but statistical returns rarely disaggregated totals by sex. U.S. returns aggregated prisoners without routine female breakouts. Theater summaries listed totals by rank, nationality, and capture date. Sex appeared only when special circumstances required notation. British and French returns followed similar patterns. The accounting logic prioritized military variables. Rank determined entitlements and work restrictions. Officers could not be compelled to labor. Unit identification enabled intelligence assessment and repatriation processing. Capture date and location supported administrative tracking. Sex segregation occurred at compound level, not statistical level. Camp commandants maintained separate enclosures. Processing officers directed women to designated areas, but monthly returns to higher headquarters aggregated totals without sex breakouts except in special reports. The gap stems from system design, not intent. Wehrmacht auxiliaries held military status under German regulations. Allied processing treated them as POWs under convention rules. But standard reporting forms emphasized rank and unit, the traditional sorting criteria for male-dominated military populations. When women appeared in sufficient numbers to warrant separate notation, local reports sometimes specified counts. Theater summaries occasionally mentioned female compounds, but routine statistical series treated women as a subcategory within larger rank and unit classifications. This explains why photographs carry disproportionate evidentiary weight. The Regensburg image from 8 May 1945 documents female POWs at a specific time and place. The caption provides contemporary identification. The archive preserves both negative and print. Other visual evidence supplements the statistical gap. 7th Army surrender scenes show women in military formations. Camp infrastructure photographs occasionally include female compounds in frame. Signal Corps documentation provides scattered but definite proof. Oral histories from German women auxiliaries describe POW experiences in Western custody. Memoirs reference processing, compound conditions, work assignments, and repatriation. These accounts corroborate photographic evidence and fill gaps in statistical records. The documentation pattern reveals priorities. Allied forces tracked prisoners primarily as military units by regiment, division, and army. Secondary classification by rank enabled administration of convention rules. Sex appeared as a tertiary variable, noted when operationally relevant but not routinely compiled in statistical series. For historians, the gap complicates quantification. Precise totals of women POWs in U.S. custody remain uncertain. Estimates derive from fragmentary evidence, photographs, local reports, memoir accounts, and scattered statistical references. What survives with certainty? Photographic proof of female POWs at identified locations on documented dates, convention compliance requirements applied to all prisoners regardless of sex, segregation by sex occurred at compound level, repatriation processing included women in convoy manifests, the archival record privileges certain facts while obscuring others. We know with precision how many total prisoners Western allies held, over 7 million. We know mortality rates, ration scales, medical statistics, and repatriation timelines for aggregate populations. We know with less precision how many were women, though we know definitively that women were present, processed, and repatriated. The remaining question shifts from promises made to evidence of delivery. Law-mandated treatment standards, logistics determined capacity, administration implemented procedure. What the record shows was done, not rumored, not claimed, but documented, comes next. Europe, post-war period through present. Archival repositories holding wartime documentation. A researcher retrieves the Regensburg print and its caption card from National Archives holdings. The negative, print, and documentation form a complete evidentiary package. Myths of vengeance circulated during and after the war. Compiled evidence shows ordered intake under the 1929 Geneva Convention. Early bottlenecks corrected by summer 1945. Low Western Allied POW mortality relative to all other theaters and custody systems. The photographic archive documents the moment. 8th May 1945, Regensburg, 3rd U.S. Army. Women in Wehrmacht uniform behind U.S. wire. The image proves custody status. The caption provides identification. The archive maintains chronology. Theater orders governed procedure. European theater directives mandated ration equivalence and medical inspection. Provost Marshal circulars established processing protocols, civil affairs bulletins, revised contact policies on documented schedules. Ration policies appear in quartermaster records, daily calorie targets, authorized substitutions, and delivery tonnages show both shortfalls and corrections. Medical summaries track disease incidents, vaccination coverage, and mortality trends. The statistics reveal a system under stress that nonetheless functioned within convention parameters. Non-fraternization orders enforced distance through summer 1945. Relaxations came in documented phases. June exceptions for children. July limited adult contact. September general rescission. The policy arc shows institutional adaptation from occupation security to reconstruction pragmatism. Repatriation schedules processed millions through 1946 and 47, transport rosters allocated rail cars, return quotas governed monthly flows, camp closures marked population drawdown. The administrative machine moved prisoners from custody to release on measurable timelines. For women auxiliaries, the compiled record shows parallel experience. Initial capture during spring 1945, mass surrenders, processing through established POW channels, segregation in designated compounds, medical care under standard protocols, ration delivery at authorized scales, subject to early shortages affecting all prisoners equally. Work assignments followed convention rules, labor on authorized non-military tasks, agriculture, rubble clearing, reconstruction, medical certification for fitness. Supervision by camp authorities, progressive normalization as contact policies eased, repatriation within aggregate flows. Women moved in mixed convoys or small single-sex groups. Statistical documentation prioritized rank and unit over sex. Transport manifests recorded destinations without routine sex disaggregation. The evidentiary triangle, law, logistics, and documentation, defines outcomes. Law established rights and obligations. Logistics determined capacity and constraints. Documentation preserved the record of implementation. What the record shows: women in Wehrmacht uniform entered U.S. custody as prisoners of war, convention standards applied, segregation occurred, processing followed established protocol, rations delivered at policy scales, with early shortages affecting all categories, medical care provided under theater standards. Contact policies evolved from prohibition to limited permission to normalization. Work assignments within convention limits, repatriation through documented channels. What the record does not show: systematic reprisals, starvation policies, denial of medical care, or exclusion from repatriation. The absence of evidence for atrocity claims, combined with positive evidence of convention compliance, supports conclusions about treatment. The photograph matters because it anchors analysis in verifiable fact. Regensburg, 8th May 1945, women behind wire, U.S. custody, documented infrastructure. The image cannot tell individual stories, but it proves aggregate policy implementation. On 8th May 1945 at Regensburg, the U.S. Army's camera captured women behind wire and a system that, by directive and number, replaced retaliation with procedure. Law governed, logistics adapted, administration processed millions, including women, under measurable standards. The evidence compiles across sources, orders, photographs, statistics, and reports converge. Fear met procedure, rumor encountered documentation, outcomes followed law, not vengeance. The record stands, the numbers tell the story, the photographs preserve the moment, memory serves when grounded in fact. Approximately 500,000 German female auxiliaries served by 1945. Western allies processed over 7 million prisoners in spring and summer of that year. U.S. custody operated under the 1929 Geneva Convention throughout. Non-fraternization policies relaxed from June through September 1945. Dated photographs confirm female POW enclosures, with the Regensburg image from 8th May 1945 providing primary evidence. The compiled record shows segregated processing, documented rations at policy scales with early shortages corrected by summer, medical care under theater standards, work details within convention limits, and staged repatriation through 1946 and 47. Outcomes are evidenced by orders, intake figures, ration policies, medical summaries, and repatriation schedules. Women appear in photographs but remain underrepresented in aggregate statistical ledgers that prioritized rank and unit over sex in routine reporting. In Western custody, the decisive factors were orders, calories, shelter, and transport, counted, audited, and preserved in the record. Law constrained discretion, logistics determined capacity, administration implemented procedure. The photograph from Regensburg endures, women behind wire on the day Germany surrendered, processed under a system that chose documentation over retaliation, procedure over chaos. If you value fact-based military history grounded in archival sources, consider supporting the channel.